Everyone, I'm back with some more modern action, and today I'm going to try and figure out if Treasure Cruise is all it's cracked up to be. I know a lot of people, including myself, have been talking a lot about this card and how it impacts Legacy, but it also seems like it has a place in Modern as well, because there are a lot of overlapping things between some random free spells, fetch lands, and just like cantrips, and overall just putting a lot of cards in your graveyard. So blue decks are there in Modern. They exist, right? There's some Delver strategies and blue-white red, kind of like mid-range, but mostly functions like a burn deck. And for the most part, like from the black-green side of things, I haven't minded those matchups too much. Things like Tarmogoyf and Liliana the Veil are just really tough for them to deal with, in addition to all the discard, just stripping away like their best and most important spells. So Treasure Cruise is probably going to be like the Ancestral Vision or Jace the Mind Sculptor that people have wanted for blue decks in Modern for a long time, or at least that's what I think. So I decided to try this out, and I think this is like a pretty good baseline strategy to try this out in, where at the end of the format, you might not look at this deck and be like, oh, this was like the best Treasure Cruise deck or whatever, but this is a good place to start, I think, because this is already a known quantity, and things like Treasure Cruise just go really well in this deck already. So just basically playing blue-red Delver. For threats, I have Delver of Secrets, Young Pyromancer, and Snapcaster Mage, and that's pretty standard. Some people also play Vendilion Click or Grim Lavamancer, and I like Lavamancer a lot, but I didn't want a bunch of things to be relying on my own graveyard, and with wanting to try Treasure Cruise like with the full amount, like going super hard on it with all four, I didn't actually want to play Lavamancer in this deck also, so I have some like additional removal spells. Vendilion Click is fine. It's not super exciting, not a card that I would mind having in my deck, but at the same time, something had to give, and I think if I'm drawing 3 cards pretty reliably, then I shouldn't need too many threats. Other than that, I think this is like pretty standard. Whether you play Remand or Mana Leak depends, and I think which one is going to end up being better in this deck is probably going to be dependent on which one you think is better with Treasure Cruise. And I could see arguments for both, where Remand puts a card in your graveyard and also another one in your hand that you can potentially use to fill your graveyard. But on the other hand, Mana Leak, even though it's just trading 1 for 1, is probably better if your game plan is to grind them out by drawing 3. Like I could see drawing 3 cards once or twice in the game and drawing a bunch of remands that don't really matter because it's the mid game and your opponent has a bunch of mana. So Mana Leak might end up being better, but I'm not sure. So I just have a split 3 and 2. And then for cantrips, I have 4 Serum Visions, 4 Cataxian Probe. I could also play Sleight of Hand, but Sleight of Hand doesn't really do much, I don't think. Like, it doesn't give you the amount of selection that you need, whereas I think Serum Visions does. And I don't think it's really any contest which one is better between Serum Visions and Sleight of Hand. It's just, I think Serum Visions is good enough and Sleight of Hand is not. So other than that, a couple Spell Snares, a couple Spell Pierces. I could see cutting one or the other depending on the metagame, but since this is kind of an open metagame, I don't really know what I'm going to play against. I just have 2 and 2, whereas Spell Pierce is pretty good against Planeswalkers, most notably Liliana the Veil. And Spell Snare is better in blue mirrors and against Tarmogoyfs, so both of these have their upsides. And then for removal, I have 3 Lightning Bolts, not 4. I wanted to play some Pillar of Flames to handle Kitchen Finks and Voice of Resurgence out of the pod decks, because I think both of those are a pretty big problem. And then I have a Miser's Gutshot to be another 0 mana spell for Treasure Cruise, and because I think Gutshot is basically just underplayed in Modern in general. There are a lot of mana birds, a lot of Delver Secrets, Dark Confidants, stuff like that you really want to kill, and like, yeah, you can Lightning Bolt them, and that's fine, but having Gutshot as an additional answer is pretty nice. And Vapor Snags basically are there to handle bigger creatures. I've seen some lists with more, some with less, and I like having 2 in addition to a Dismember, so I have 3 outs to big things like Restoration Angel and Tarmogoyf, and with Snapcaster Mage, I think that's enough, especially since I'm hoping to see a bunch of cards every game and basically find what I need. Other than that, I have 19 lands. A lot of the decks played 18, but if the games are going a little bit longer, I kind of want the additional land because I feel like I want to make all my land drops, but that could be wrong. That could be the wrong way to go about things, where if the game is going longer and I'm drawing a bunch of cards, like maybe I want less lands because I don't want to get flooded, like I want to stop at 4 and just have all actions. So this extra land might be wrong, but if nothing else, I have a lot of high casting cost stuff on my sideboard, so having the extra land will be nice there. And then other than that, I think the only thing I really want to point out is that I have 9 fetch lands. It could be more just because of Treasure Cruise, and it's kind of nice with Delver Secrets too, where if you have a Delver and a fetch land, upkeep, you can look at your top card. If it's something that doesn't flip your Delver, like a land, or even just like a card that does flip your Delver, but you don't want to draw it, you can shuffle it away. So fetch lands with Delver are pretty nice. We have plenty of fetchable lands, and I think the only real difference between my mana base and someone else's is that I don't have as many steam vents as people do. I think people just play too many shock lands, and I want these to fetch, but I don't necessarily want to draw these. Other than that, I have 1 Sulphur Falls, which is fine in small doses. You know, it's a blue-red duel that comes into play untapped, which is nice, but you don't want to lead on Sulphur Falls. Like any hand where you have like 2 Sulphur Falls or whatever is just a mulligan, I think. So playing 1 because I feel like if you draw 1, it is basically a free roll, but anything past that is pretty bad. So just the 1. And then for the sideboard, I just have a bunch of like high impact, like pretty spicy, powerful cards. So I tried to build the sideboard in such a way that I had a lot of cards against a lot of different decks. So I have a Hercules Recall on Shatterstorm against Affinity, and I wanted to see which one was better. That's like the only instance, I think, of having a card where it doesn't come in multiple places. I have a Threads mainly for Tarmogoyf, but it can also be for like Wild Nacatl or whatever. I have Hibernation mostly for pod decks, but there could be like Green Devotion decks or something. And then I have a pair of hard counter spells in Deprive and Counterflux, and both of these seem okay, but not great. But there are definitely matchups where you want additional counter spells, and I didn't want to rely just on something like Negate, where it doesn't counter everything. You know, it doesn't counter like Deceiver Exarch if I wanted to. So just have these 2 hard counter spells. I have a Magma Spray, which is like another Pillar of Flame, but the pillars in my main deck are pillars because I want to be able to go to the face against opponents that are able to stabilize, but I have Treasure Cruise and like can actually draw into a bunch of burn spells. So you don't want to draw into a bunch of stuff like Magma Spray where it doesn't do anything if their board's not clear. So if I am boarding in a Magma Spray, that probably means they have something like Finks and Voice, in which case I can afford to just sideboard the instant one. And then we have a Combust for Restoration Angel, Deceiver Exarch, a couple Blood Moons. I don't want to overload on these because I don't want to draw too many, and I also don't think that those matchups are necessarily that bad, so I just have a couple. And then I have 1 Izzet Staticaster, which I think is just a pretty good card in general and might come in a bunch of spots, but Lingering Souls is the obvious thing that it's there for, which is probably going to be pretty good against this deck. Lingering Souls is generally pretty good against Delvers, so I have 1 Staticaster. Could be more, could be Electrickery, something like that. I have 2 Spellskites that I think are pretty good against a lot of random stuff, just like Boggle, Splinter Twin, Burn, etc. And then I have a couple of equipment. So Batterskull is like the Haymaker card that you want to draw into in the really grindy matchups where you're treasure cruising, but you might not be able to stick a threat. So against something like Green-Black, I'm probably going to want this Batterskull. And then the Sword of War and Peace is to just have something where I can kind of lock it up against a deck like Blue White Red, who is going to have a bunch of Lightning Bolts and Path to Exiles and, you know, Restoration Angels, stuff like that, where I can, if they are like killing a bunch of my stuff, maybe I'm left over with like an Elemental token or something, and I can just equip that and ride that. So I like this sideboard. It could almost certainly just have a bunch of holes, but there are a lot of things I want to try, and I think this is the best way to do it, where you just have a bunch of one-ofs. So that's about it. I think this deck is pretty good. I'm not sure if I talked about cutting a Snapcaster Mage, and it's basically just because I didn't want an overabundance of things that relied on my graveyard, kind of like in the similar vein to me not playing Grim Lavamancer. But other than that, I think this deck is pretty standard, aside from me making room for 4 of these things. So we'll see how it goes. But if not this deck, I feel like there is a deck that has Treasure Cruise in it that will end up being pretty good. So we'll see.